I've always prided myself on having my life together. You know, the type, meticulous, driven, goal-oriented. That was me to a T. My friends joked about how I could turn chaos into a color-coded spreadsheet, but honestly, that kind of order kept me sane. I had a job I loved, a relationship that seemed solid, and a 5-year plan I was well on my way to completing. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I was steering the ship exactly where I wanted it to go. Or at least that's what I thought. I'd wake up every morning to the same routine. Coffee brewing before the alarm even went off, my running shoes neatly placed by the door for my 6 a.m. jog, and Jenna, my wife, still cocooned in the covers with her messy blonde hair peeking out. She'd mumble something unintelligible as I kissed her forehead before heading out, and I'd smile. It was a small moment, but it felt like home. Our life together had a rhythm, predictable, comforting. I was the kind of guy who appreciated that kind of stability. Jenna and I had been married for 8 years, and while the spark wasn't as fiery as when we first met, I figured that was normal. Love, I told myself, matured like a fine wine. We still laughed at each other's terrible jokes, planned trips we rarely took, and talked about maybe starting a family when the time was right. To me, we were solid. Work was the same kind of stability. I had climbed the corporate ladder at my finance firm and was now in a position where I could comfortably enjoy the fruits of my labor. Sure, it was demanding at times, but I thrived under pressure. Jenna would tease me about my long hours and my tendency to bring work home, but she knew how much it meant to me. As long as you don't marry your spreadsheets, she'd joke, and I'd promise to make more time for us. So, when I pulled into the driveway that Tuesday evening, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over our little suburban neighborhood, and the familiar sound of kids playing tag in the distance gave everything a serene backdrop. I walked into the house, expecting the usual, Jenna humming in the kitchen, the smell of dinner wafting through the air. Instead, I was greeted by silence. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was upstairs or out running an errand. But as I moved through the house, the quiet began to feel heavier. No TV murmuring in the background, no faint clatter of pots and pans. Even the scent of her favorite lavender diffuser was conspicuously absent. "Jenna?" I called out, my voice echoing back at me. Nothing. I headed to the kitchen, expecting to find a note on the grocery list chalkboard we kept by the fridge. Instead, I found it on the kitchen table, neatly folded and placed squarely in the center. Her handwriting was unmistakable, the loopy letters I had seen scribbled across grocery lists and birthday cards. My chest tightened as I unfolded it, a strange sense of foreboding creeping in. "I need to think about us. I've left for a bit." That was it. No love, Jenna. No explanation. Just 2 stark sentences that seemed to drain all the color from the room. At first, I stood there, frozen. My mind scrambled to make sense of it. Maybe this was a prank, though Jenna wasn't one for practical jokes. Maybe it was about her sister, who'd been struggling with health issues. But as the seconds ticked by, the pit in my stomach grew deeper. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. Straight to voicemail. "Jenna, hey, I just got home. I saw your note. Can you call me back? I'm worried." My voice cracked slightly, and I hated myself for it. I paced the kitchen for what felt like hours, replaying the last few weeks in my head, searching for clues. Had we fought recently? Not really. She'd seemed a little distant, but nothing alarming. I chalked it up to stress, work, life, the usual stuff. And sure, we hadn't been as close as we used to be, but what married couple didn't hit rough patches? I walked upstairs, half expecting to find her suitcase missing from the closet. To my surprise, everything was still there. Her favorite blue sweater hung neatly next to my jacket. Her makeup bag was untouched on the bathroom counter. It didn't look like she'd packed for a trip. If she was gone, where did she go? I tried calling her again, but it was the same result. I texted her, a simple, "Please let me know you're okay," and stared at my phone, willing it to light up. When it didn't, I sank onto the couch, the note still clutched in my hand. This had to be temporary. A day, maybe 2. She'd call, apologize for worrying me, and we'd talk it out like we always did. Whatever this was, we'd get through it. We were a team. But as the hours dragged into the night, a gnawing doubt began to creep in. What if this wasn't just a break? What if something bigger was happening? Something I hadn't seen coming. The silence in the house felt suffocating, and for the first time in years, I realized how fragile my perfectly curated life might actually be. The first few days after Jenna's note were excruciating, but I clung to the hope that this was temporary. Every morning, I woke up expecting her to walk through the door with an apologetic smile, claiming she just needed time to clear her head. I left her messages every evening, keeping them short and kind, just checking in, or hope you're okay. When she didn't respond, I told myself she needed space. I tried to be patient. By the end of the first week, patience gave way to worry. I reached out to her sister, Claire, who offered little help. "She's fine, Tom," Claire had said vaguely, avoiding specifics. "I think she just needs some time alone. She'll come around." Her tone was guarded, as if she knew more than she was letting on. But I didn't press her. When the second week rolled around, the house began to feel eerily empty. I buried myself in work, trying to ignore the gnawing anxiety. But at night, the silence was deafening. I'd lie awake replaying every moment from the past few months, trying to pinpoint where things might have gone wrong. Had I missed the signs? Were there signs? Her first call came 2 weeks after she left. I had been staring at her picture on my phone, wondering if I should call again, when it buzzed in my hand. Her name on the screen made my heart leap. "Jenna, thank God. Are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm fine, Tom," she said softly, her voice distant. I need more time. Please don't make this harder than it already is." "Make what harder?" I asked, desperation creeping into my tone. "Jenna, just tell me what's going on. Whatever it is, we can fix it together." "I can't do this right now," she replied, her voice trembling. "I'll call you soon." And just like that, she hung up. After that, her calls became sporadic. Weeks turned into months, and her voice grew colder with each conversation. I tried to convince myself that this was just a phase, that she'd come back. But deep down, doubt began to creep in. It was 3 months after she left when I decided I couldn't wait anymore. Her silence, her evasiveness, it didn't add up. I needed answers. I started with the basics, reaching out to mutual friends. Most of them hadn't heard from her, and the few who had said she seemed vague and distant. One friend, however, hesitated before answering. "Look, Tom," they said, lowering their voice. "I don't want to get involved, but I saw Jenna last weekend. She was with someone." The words hit me like a slap. "With someone? What do you mean?" "A guy," they admitted reluctantly. "I don't know who he was, but they looked close." I didn't want to say anything until I was sure, but I hung up before they could finish. My hands were shaking as I typed her name into every social media platform I could think of. Jenna was private, rarely posting, but I started to scour through photos she'd been tagged in, looking for clues. It felt wrong, like an invasion of her privacy, but I was desperate. That's when I found it. A picture buried deep in a friend of a friend's album. It was blurry, but unmistakable. Jenna, walking hand in hand with a man I didn't recognize. They were in the city, laughing, her head thrown back in that carefree way I used to love. The caption read, "Cute couple." My stomach churned as I clicked on the man's profile. His name was Aaron, and he had dozens of photos. Photos of him and Jenna together, smiling at some rooftop bar, walking through a park, and even posing at what looked like a weekend cabin. My hands tightened into fists as I scrolled, each picture a dagger to my chest. Couldn't believe it. While I was sitting at home, waiting for her, Jenna was building a new life with someone else. The betrayal felt unbearable. It wasn't just the photos. It was the way she looked in them, so happy, as if the past 5 years we'd shared meant nothing. But I needed confirmation. My gut was screaming, but I wanted to hear it from her. I called Jenna that night, my voice calm despite the storm raging inside me. "Hey, it's me. Can we talk?" "Tom, it's late," she replied, sounding irritated. "It won't take long. I just want to know, is there someone else?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, She sighed. Why are you asking me this? Because I need the truth, Jenna. I said, my voice cracking. Are you with someone? Another pause. Then, quietly, yes. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. How long? I managed to ask. It doesn't matter, she said defensively. Tom, we weren't happy. You know that. This isn't just about you or him. It's about me figuring out what I need. Her words cut deeper than I thought possible. She didn't sound guilty, didn't try to explain or apologize. To her, it was as if I had been erased. Like our life together was nothing more than a chapter she'd decided to close. That night, as I stared at the photos of her with Aaron, I knew one thing for certain. My life would never be the same. The night I confirmed Jenna's betrayal, something inside me shattered. The woman I had built my life with, the one I thought I knew better than anyone, was gone. Or perhaps the version of her I had loved was never real. I stared at those photos for hours, cycling through every emotion. Anger, heartbreak, disbelief. But as dawn crept in through the windows, something unexpected settled over me. A sense of clarity. I realized I had two choices. I could let this pain consume me, wallow in self-pity, and let Jenna's betrayal define the rest of my life. Or I could take control of what little remained and rebuild. I chose the latter. The first step was practical: protect myself. I called my father, who was my go-to for tough conversations. His calm, steady voice grounded me as I told him everything. Tom, you need to take care of yourself, he said firmly. This isn't just about your emotions. This is about your future. He was right. Within hours, I contacted a lawyer, someone my dad trusted from years in business. Sarah, young but sharp as a razor, walked me through every step of what I needed to do to secure my finances. First, we'll file for divorce, Sarah said, her tone matter-of-fact but not unkind. You'll want to freeze joint accounts immediately and separate your assets. Do you have documentation of your financial contributions to the marriage? Yes, I replied, pulling out the meticulously organized files Jenna used to tease me about. For the first time, my obsessive need for order felt like a blessing. The divorce proceedings began swiftly. Jenna didn't contest much, perhaps out of guilt or simply because she was preoccupied with Aaron. I didn't care about the reasons. I just wanted a clean break. I thought seeing her in court might dredge up old feelings, but the woman who sat across the room from me felt like a stranger. She avoided my gaze, and I made no effort to meet hers. By the time the divorce was finalized, I had secured everything important. My savings, my investments, even the house. The lawyer was thorough, ensuring Jenna couldn't stake a claim to anything she hadn't earned. It was liberating in a way, but the process was also a stark reminder of how much of my life had been intertwined with hers. When the paperwork was done, I stood outside the courthouse, the final decree in my hands. It was over, but as freeing as that realization was, it also left me staring at a blank slate. A life without Jenna, without the plans we'd made together. I could have returned to the house, tried to pick up the pieces and continue as though nothing had happened. But that wasn't me. The Tom who had meticulously planned every detail of his life was gone, replaced by someone who knew how fragile those plans could be. So I decided to start over. I sold the house. I packed up my belongings, everything that still felt like mine, and left the town where I had spent most of my adult life. I didn't want to see the park where we had picnicked, the coffee shop where we used to spend lazy Sunday mornings, or the gym where I had once run into her with Aaron. I moved to a city 3 hours away, a place where no one knew me. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. For the first time in years, I wasn't tied down by expectations or routines. I was free to redefine who I was. I found a modest apartment in a bustling downtown area. The noise, the energy, the anonymity, it all felt right. I didn't want quiet anymore. Quiet reminded me of empty houses and unanswered calls. But the real turning point came when I decided to take a leap of faith. I had always dreamed of running my own business but had never dared to pursue it, too afraid of the risks. With nothing left to lose, I poured myself into the idea. The process was grueling. I spent weeks researching, planning, and pitching to investors. I drained a portion of my savings to cover startup costs, something I never would have done in my old life. But the work was cathartic. Every hour I spent designing the business felt like a step away from the wreckage of my marriage. When the doors to my consulting firm finally opened, I felt something I hadn't in months. Pride. The business thrived in ways I hadn't dared to hope. Clients poured in and my team grew. The long hours didn't feel like work. They felt like therapy, a way to channel my energy into something meaningful. As the months passed, the pain of Jenna's betrayal began to dull. It never disappeared entirely, but it no longer defined me. I started running again, exploring new hobbies and meeting new people. Slowly, I felt like myself again, or maybe a better version of myself. One evening, as I stood in my office overlooking the city, I realized how far I had come. The man I saw reflected in the glass wasn't the same person who had been blindsided by a note on a kitchen table. That man was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more resilient, and ready for whatever came next. A year can change so much. 12 months ago, my life had crumbled into pieces I didn't think I'd ever be able to put back together. And yet, here I was, standing in a vibrant new city, feeling more alive than I had in years. That day, the sun was shining brightly as I wandered through the bustling aisles of a local market. The air was filled with the sense of freshly baked bread and roasted coffee, mingling with the laughter of children running between stalls. Musicians played cheerful tunes on guitars and violins, and the chatter of vendors created a comforting hum of life. I had come to love days like this, simple, unplanned moments that reminded me of the joy in the ordinary. My business was thriving. I had made new friends, and while I wasn't in a rush to start dating, I felt open to the possibility of love again. As I turned the corner by a stand selling handmade candles, a voice cut through the noise. It was soft but unmistakable, a sound etched into my memory. "Tom!" I froze. My body stiffened as I slowly turned toward the voice. There she was, Jenna. She stood just a few feet away, holding the arm of the man I had seen in those devastating photos, Aaron. He looked as polished as ever, but there was a tension in his posture, a weariness that hadn't been there before. Jenna, on the other hand, seemed both familiar and different. Her hair was shorter, her makeup lighter, but it was her expression that caught me off guard. She looked uncertain, almost vulnerable. "Tom," she said again, releasing Aaron's arm and taking a step toward me. Her voice trembled. "I can't believe it's you." I didn't say anything at first. I didn't feel anger or sadness, just a surprising calm, like the eye of a storm. Jenna hesitated, her gaze flicking between me and Aaron, who now stood awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable. Can we talk? Just us?" she asked, motioning for Aaron to stay where he was. I nodded, more out of curiosity than anything else. We stepped a few feet away, closer to a stand selling honey and preserves. She glanced at the jars, as though trying to gather her thoughts, before finally speaking. "I've thought about this moment so many times," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I owe you an explanation. I should have given you one back then, but I didn't have the courage." "Go on," I said, my tone even giving nothing away. She took a deep breath. "When I left, it wasn't just about us. It was about me. I felt trapped, Tom. Not by you, but by the life we'd built. Everything was so structured, so planned. Felt like there was no room to breathe. I started questioning who I was, what I wanted, and I panicked. Instead of talking to you, I ran." "And Aaron?" I asked, gesturing subtly toward the man now pretending to browse a nearby stall. She flinched. "He was a distraction. Someone who made me feel free, spontaneous, like I was living a life I'd never had. But it wasn't real, Tom. None of it was. I see that now." Her voice cracked, and she looked down at her hands, wringing them nervously. I let her words hang in the air for a moment before responding. "And now? What's changed?" Jenna looked up, her eyes glistening. "Everything. Aaron and it's over. He wasn't who I thought he was. He was selfish, and I realized how much I gave up for something that never really mattered. I've been thinking about you, about us. I know I hurt you, Tom. I made a mistake, the biggest mistake of my life. And I'm so sorry. Her voice broke, and she stepped closer. Maybe we can start over? Fix what I broke? I miss you. I miss us. I took a long, steady breath, letting her words sink in. The old me might have crumbled under the weight of her apology, longing for the life we once had. But the man standing here now was different, stronger, wiser. Jenna, I said, my voice steady and firm. I'm glad you found clarity, but I've moved on. What we had is in the past, and that's where it belongs. Her eyes filled with tears. But, Tom, we could. No, I interrupted gently but firmly. You made your choice and I've made mine. I've built a new life, one that doesn't include you. And I'm happy. Jenna stared at me, searching for something in my face, some sign that I might change my mind. But I didn't. Take care of yourself, Jenna, I said, offering her a small, sincere smile. Then, without waiting for a reply, I turned and walked away, weaving through the colorful stalls and bustling crowd. As I walked, a sense of peace washed over me. For so long, I had been defined by the pain of her betrayal, but not anymore. That chapter was closed, and ahead of me lay a future full of promise. I smiled to myself, the vibrant market buzzing around me. Life had moved on, and so had I. Walking away from Jenna that day felt like shedding the last remnants of a weight I had been unknowingly carrying. The past year had been a journey of rediscovery. Painful? Yes, but transformative in ways I hadn't anticipated. And now, for the first time in a long time, my future felt wide open. The days after that encounter were surprisingly calm. I had expected a flood of emotions, regret, nostalgia, maybe even anger, but instead, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Seeing Jenna again, hearing her apologies, had given me the closure I didn't realize I needed. It wasn't her words that brought peace, but the realization that I was no longer tethered to our shared past. My life in the new city had grown into something I was deeply proud of. The consulting firm I'd started had flourished, far exceeding my expectations. What began as a small operation run out of a rented office had turned into a thriving business with a growing team. Every milestone we hit, our first big client, our first major expansion, felt like a validation of my hard work and resilience. But it wasn't just the business that brought me joy. I had built a life full of the little things that made every day meaningful. Saturday mornings were reserved for runs along the river, where the sunlight danced on the water and the city skyline gleamed in the distance. Evenings were often spent at a local cafe where the owner knew my name and always had my favorite table ready. I had also rediscovered a love for art, something I hadn't touched since college. A few months ago, I signed up for a painting class on a whim, thinking it might be a fun distraction. It turned out to be more than that. It became a way to express emotions I couldn't put into words. My first few canvases were a chaotic mess, but over time, I found my rhythm. Now, my apartment was filled with colorful abstract pieces that reflected the journey I'd been on. And then there were the people. Moving to a new city meant starting from scratch socially, which was daunting at first. But slowly, I built a network of friends who felt like family. There was Sam, my endlessly curious neighbor, who would knock on my door with random trivia and insist we try new restaurants together. Laura, the owner of the cafe, who always offered sage advice over cups of tea. And even my coworkers, who weren't just colleagues but true friends who celebrated every success as though it were their own. Romance, though, was a slower journey. For a while, I avoided it entirely, unsure if I was ready to trust again. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. It started with a chance meeting at the local library, where I'd gone to pick up a book for one of my art projects. I was struggling to find the right aisle when I heard a voice behind me. Looking for something specific? I turned to see a woman with a warm smile and bright eyes that seemed to light up the dimly lit space. Her name was Emma, and she worked at the library part-time while pursuing her master's degree in psychology. We struck up a conversation that day, and what began as small talk about books and art grew into something much deeper. Emma was unlike anyone I'd ever met. She was thoughtful and kind, with a quiet confidence that drew me in. Our first few dates were simple. Walks in the park, late-night talks over coffee, but they felt effortless, like we'd known each other for years. She never pressed me about my past, giving me the space to share at my own pace. When I finally did, she listened without judgment, her presence a soothing balm to old wounds. With Emma, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. A year after that market encounter with Jenna, I found myself standing on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city lights twinkle against the night sky. Emma was inside, curled up on the couch with a book, her laughter occasionally drifting out as she read something funny. As I stood there, taking it all in, I realized how far I'd come. My life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was mine, shaped by my choices and the resilience I had found in the face of heartbreak. Jenna's betrayal had been a painful chapter, but it wasn't the end of my story. It was the catalyst that pushed me to rebuild, to rediscover who I was and what I wanted. Now, I was living a life filled with purpose, surrounded by people who truly cared for me, and open to love in a way I hadn't been before. The past was behind me, and the future stretched ahead like a blank canvas, waiting to be painted with all the colors of possibility. And this time I was ready. Support the channel by subscribing. It really makes a difference.